Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome to another session of our Day One and Beyond series, where we take you through various topics and activities related to building out on Oracle Cloud. So our today's session is disaster recovery on Oracle Cloud infrastructure, where you will learn key concepts, techniques, and best practices for designing a highly available disaster recovery solution in OCI. I'm Olivia Ferda, cloud engineer on the customer enablement team, and today I'm joined by Jason Cook, master principal cloud architect, and Greg King, technical program management, as the main presenters. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jason.
Thanks, Olivier, and appreciate everybody being able to join us on today's session on DR. Okay. Today we're going to go through talking to the business about starting your own DR projects. We're going to go through some of the key requirements you want to gather as you start up your projects. We'll circle back around to architectural best practices and the things we want you to know about building up the foundation so that you can have a good recovery environment. And then we're going to switch gears. I'm going to bring Greg King in. And he's going to talk to us about one of the exciting services that came out called Full Stack Disaster Recovery. And he's going to go through that service, provide a little bit of demo, and show some of the automation and orchestration capabilities that we have with FSDR. As I mentioned along the way, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and click on that Q&A button there in Zoom. And then we've got some panelists joining us today. Lynn and Greg and I will try to answer those questions in that Q&A chat there. Okay. So as IT professionals, I probably don't need to convince any of you why DR is important, right? Oftentimes the challenge is, how do we get the business to engage, to support, and help us sustain a DR effort, right? And anybody that's run across or encountered a DR event, some of the things that always ring true is these types of things end up causing a loss of revenue for companies, right? If you think about like your e-commerce site going down, right? That's an event where you can potentially lose sales for whatever time your environment's down. If we're talking a company that's in warehouse or manufacturing, right? When those warehouse floors are not, running, you've got associates that might be standing idle. And if you're one of those companies that again have, a big well-known brand, when your company's down, there's definitely a brand impact. Okay. These are some of the things you definitely want to talk to the business about. Forbes had an interesting article that came out with a couple years ago that for smaller and even mid-sized organizations that hit one of these large DR events, 40% of them fail to open their doors, right? And some will hobble along for a few more months, but even then, they'll still be, 25% of those companies end up having some sort of impact where they may also close shop. I know working with one of the large companies I was previously at, we estimated that if we were, hitting a DR event, that we could be down for as much as 3 to 4 months. And in that time period, if we weren't able to recovery, we would probably not be a company anymore, right? And so why those things are kind of important is oftentimes when we start our journey with a DR project, it's very IT centric, right? The IT guys know where we've got some deficiencies in our recovery plan or our backups or HA. And, we try to, naturally, organically move those projects from IT, but we really need the support of the business to be able to sustain those efforts. And so as you're starting up your projects, you want to make sure you're engaging them. You want to make sure you're talking with them about what's the impact of unplanned downtime, right? If our e-com site's down, how much do we lose per hour in sales? If the manufacturing is down, right? How many employees do we have there that may not be able to do their job if the applications aren't working or their manual workarounds we'd expect them to do? If you've just had an event, right, where components have gone down, your data center had an event, or something in the cloud, I hate to say it, but those are the times to maybe bring these conversations up as well, right? Hey, last weekend when our site was down, what did that cost us? What was the impact, right? We need to use those events to help pull out requirements, pull out, what we could potentially face as a business if there's some sort of DR event, okay? And oftentimes when there is a DR event, it can come from multiple different things, but we lump them into 3 categories, right? Oftentimes this is some sort of operational failure, right? I lost a networking router, and because of that, part of my, workload was unable to communicate. Natural disasters, of course, happen. Small things. It could be there was a fire, there was a water leak. I know I've in past jobs encountered those with DR events, and of course, there's human causative errors, right? People mess up, people delete data, people misconfigure environment, or plan changes don't go correctly, and maybe they take out a significant portion of your environment that's public facing, right? These are the types of events as you're engaging the business you want to talk to them about. Like, hey, what happens if, our data center in Virginia was unavailable? All right. How much of our business do we have there? Who would be impacted? Or if, we lost data for a certain amount of time, can we recover it from another source? So these kind of generate the what if scenarios that you want to play out when you're engaging the business to talk about when these things happen, what would be the impact? And as an IT professional, what is our recovery? How's my environment wired up today that I could recover from a router being down, or I could recover if the entire data center was down? Okay. One of the ones I have from my history, and it's one of the stories I like talking about, is when I started the cloud journey with one of my previous companies. We had started deploying out a customer-facing application, and it was all in the cloud. And we've been running a series of workshops with our developers, with our application folks, and they were deploying this workload on the cloud. And we got to the point where we were deploying out the pre-prod environment. And it was on a Friday, and we were getting ready to do a demo in a couple hours with the executive leadership team. And I had a junior developer walk across this large room where we had all these people, developing the app and doing the final testing. Say, there was an issue, and I tried to fix it, and I ended up deleting the entire cloud stack. And if you know anything about automated deployments or infrastructure as code, deleting the stack means you've deleted pretty much everything that was in that stack. And in this case, it was the entire pre-prod environment. It was just gone. And at that point, people in the room started looking around, noticing that the environment was toast. This analyst was very worried that he'd just, put his career at jeopardy. Thankfully, a week before, we talked about, automation and infrastructure as code. And one of the things we wanted to do in this environment, this pre-prod environment, was teach the application folks and the product teams how to deploy things with code as a stack. Thankfully, we were able to just rerun the stack with, loss of data that was just from that day and get everything deployed out for that leadership team. But this is an example where, sometimes your recovery mechanism isn't a big DR event. Sometimes your recovery to a human error like this one is just the automation that you used for provisioning the environment, right? At this point, I think, I want to bring Greg King in the conversation as well here, maybe a little early before I have him talk about FSDR. And Greg, are there any stories where, things went wrong, things blew up with customers or, a past life that you might want to just, talk to the group about that you've experienced?
Hmm. Um, yeah, so we have a customer, Watch, who's a partner. They are a JDE service provider. That's all they do. I think they have about 40 customers or something like that. And they're based in the UK. And I think it was last year. Yeah, it was last summer. They had a heat wave there that took out what was it? The London data center. For the OCI region, that London region went down. Um, and so these guys are really, they have their own DR process in place, and it's all manual. And there's only two guys that recover these things, and they have a recovery time of, I think they promise the customer they'll be up in 4 hours if they go down. Well, that whole data center went down, and out of the 40 customers, I think they had 18 that were there in London. So although these guys can get done, 4 hours, they can get one customer done, maybe two. They had 18 they had to get done. So, and this is what we're going to talk about a little later on is full stack DR and some of the value that it provides. So they had 18 customers. They could handle two in that 4 hour downtime, getting it back up. And it wasn't for a long, it took a while for London to come back up. Anyway, um, they were stuck. I mean, they didn't meet their SLAs. And that's because after they got those two systems done, they had 16 more to do. And they just didn't have the people to get it done. So full stack DR, we'll talk about that a little later. And this is why they jumped on it. They really like full stack DR because now all those 18 customers they could do at the same time. And instead of taking 4 hours, they could probably get all 18 of those customers up and running again within that same 4 hour period of time, perhaps even less. Anyway,
Yeah.
I thought that was a cool story.
Yeah, no, thanks, Greg. That's something I can definitely resonate with past DR events I've had. Oftentimes, it's not a technology problem; it's a people problem. You don't have infinite people when things go sideways. So automation, especially the tools we're going to talk about, I think helps solve some of that problem. So yeah, here in the last section, that's going to be a fun conversation. Let me keep going here, guys. So as we're talking with the business, I think all of us are very familiar with the terms RTO, RPO, right? Recovery time objective, right? The time for when things blow up, how long does it take you to fully recover the environment? RPO, recovery point objectives, from the time you've taken your last backup, your last sync, to the time that there was an event, how much data can you lose? I found in my career, sometimes these are hard conversations. RT and RPO kind of bounce off our customers as, yeah, that's an IT thing. And so I tend to reframe them in, how much data can you lose, right? An e-commerce site, how much data could you potentially, stand to lose before it becomes significantly impactful to your RTO or to your running your business? How much data could you lose for an internal system that maybe not the source of truth? Can you replay it for somewhere else? With recovery time objectives, a little more straightforward. How much can you afford to be down, right? Your typical downtime. And if any of you on the phone, any on the conference call have done this before, and you've engaged the business on this conversation, I guarantee a few of you got this basic line back from the customer. Well, I want to lose no data, and I'd like to have no downtime. I'd like to just have, basically 0 and 0 for both. Can we just do active? And while there's applications like e-commerce, you should absolutely have that conversation with. It also comes back to an affordability challenge, right? Having a 0 RTO and a 0 RPO or near 0 RPO becomes expensive, right? The cost of your environment, adding that in there might be 2, 3, 4x the original cost of production environment to bolt on an active environment in another region, right? And not that you shouldn't have this conversation, but the third, criteria that you normally bring up with customers is, what's your affordability, right? Because I've had recent conversations with customers. I want 0 and 0, and I don't have any money for DR. So what can we do? All right, that kind of puts us at a challenge of, you can't deliver the perfect, recovery with no money or with small money. The nice part about it is there's other solutions, right? And these are old terms. Most of you have probably heard these as well. You can absolutely do active, right? But there's also other approaches that provide you a good RTO and a good RPO in seconds and minutes if you do active passive, right? The idea that you've got your production environment in another location, you've got an environment that is sized and configured with all your data, but it's not receiving any kind of customer load. You've got Pilot Light. It's very similar to that. You've got your production environment still. You've got an environment in another location, and it's got the config, and it's got your data, but it's not sized up. It's the smallest possible unit you can have to, continue doing replication, to continue receiving patches, to have all your app config, but it doesn't have the cost burden of having that one-for-one, right? And the idea is you got to scale that out at time of DR. So that gives you a little longer RTO, gives you good RPO still, and it saves you some costs. And then for some other environments, maybe you just need the data, right? They're not the source of truth. You don't want to lose the data for them, but they're not running your production systems. And backup and restore is still a valuable and practical solution for environments that don't need to have that high cost profile and don't need to have that immediate recovery. Okay, these are how you kind of sometimes back yourself off of that active, and maybe you're a little more funding challenged. One of the more important things that I've also noticed is when you're building out your DR environment, it's important you set a good foundation, right? Jumping straight to building out the app, failover scenarios is sometimes will get you in trouble if you haven't built a solid foundation to build that recovery from. And so I want to talk about just a few of those things I want you to consider as you're building out your DR foundations in OCI that you want to make sure you lay down first before you start putting on those critical workloads. Okay. First one, our distributed infrastructure. In OCI, we've got 3 things you should consider: your regions, your availability domains, and fault domains. Now, regions are pretty easy, right? We've got a region in Virginia. We got a region in Phoenix. We've got several regions across Europe and across the other places in the world. You should pick a region that is, one, if you're going to put a production there, close to your customers, right? So you got better performance. You also want to pick a region of where you want to have your secondary site for potential failover. So maybe you put your production in Virginia and your secondary failover region is Phoenix, right? That's how you'd leverage your region strategy. Availability domains are like data centers, all right? So within every region, there's 1 to 3 availability domains. Now, you can use availability domains for both DR and HA. Again, they are 1 for a data center, right? So in Virginia, we have 3 data centers or 3 availability domains, right? Where you use this is if there is a major data center wide outage, right? The building burns down, right? One of the ADs. You still got 2 more ADs in Virginia that your workload can run from, right? So you would spread your workload out across multiple availability domains in each region for both DR and certainly high availability. Okay. Fault domains is the one that usually trips customers up. Within every availability domain, every data center, there are groupings of infrastructure. So if you were to walk into one of our availability domains and look at racks 1 through 9, right? Those racks are going to have storage, they're going to have networking, they're going to have compute, and a host of other infrastructure components in each one of those racks. A grouping of those racks is a fault domain. If you walk down and you look at racks 11 through 21, that could be fault domain 2, 21 through whatever could be fault domain 3. Now you use fault domains for component level failover, right? Because again, it's a grouping of various infrastructure components. So in fault domain 1, at the top of a rack, if a router dies, it's not going to impact the infrastructure in fault domain 2 and 3. Okay, so it's critical to understand your regions and have basically a global hosting strategy. Availability domains give you a little HA and DR. Fault domains, make sure your workload's spread out across multiple fault domains so that there's a individual component, you can ride that out. Okay. Second thing, network connectivity, right? The obvious one. Again, back to our scenario, I've got my production over in Ashburn. I've got my DR in Phoenix. You want to make sure you have connectivity to Phoenix in a DR event, right? So if Ashburn is down for whatever reason, you have some sort of connectivity to Phoenix. Could be VPN, could be fast connect or multiple fast connects if you think that's important. And between both regions, you have cross-region connectivity. Some of the things you're going to want to do to replicate data is going to go over that cross-region connectivity. So you're going to want to make sure you establish that as well. And then if you've got, external facing site, you've got customers on the internet coming to your e-commerce site, think about your DNS, your traffic management. How do you shift the traffic over from Ashburn to Phoenix if there's a DR event? All right. So these are like the 2 or 3 networking things you want to make sure you have as part of your global network strategy and how you're going to fail the network over in the event that an entire region's out. Okay. Last thing, your data replication and your environment recovery, right? And there's a very complicated diagram here. Let me just break down a few things you want to consider. One, what's your current component failover, right? Have you spread your application out across multiple availability domains? Where practical, are you using fault domains inside each one of those availability domains to spread out even more for component failure? Have you backed up your data? If you've got a database, do you need to have a standby in that same region? Right? As you're building out your DR, have you built out your cross-region replication, right? With something like the Oracle database, are you using DataGuard to replicate the bits and bytes from, Ashburn to Phoenix to a DR instance over there, right? And the last component, and this is what Greg's going to talk about, is, you've got a lot of components here. How do you orchestrate the event where you need to bring up servers, load balancers, databases, or other components? What's the tool that's going to help be a force multiplier for your team? So you're not the only one having to do this. You've got some sort of automation helping you when there's a DR event. That's kind of like the third foundational thing you need to figure out. So figure out your region strategy, figure out your network strategy, make sure you kind of understand how to replicate your data and the recovery. And that's definitely going to lay a very good foundation for how you can then recover your workloads.
All right, I am Greg King. I'm the product manager for Full Stack DR or Full Stack Disaster Recovery. I work for the engineering team, and Full Stack Disaster Recovery is, we just released this back in October of last year. And like it says, it's business continuity at the click of a button. Well, it's really disaster recovery at the click of a button. So less effort to manage and lower cost to maintain. So basically, we're going to do DR. I'm going to go into this in more detail, but we can do whatever basically what we do is whatever you're doing for DR right now, we can automate that without you having to change anything about the way you're doing it right now. And I'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. If you are not doing disaster recovery right now, then you deploy your applications the way you want for disaster recovery, following different applications have different ways they want you to do DR. You will follow those directions, and then we will automate what you put into place. All right, and we're going to look at it. We're going to see it in action here in a minute. Single pane of glass. What I mean by this is enterprise doesn't have just one application or business system in OCI. They have many custom systems that each have a completely different recovery process with different requirements for RPO and RTO. So full stack DR normalizes the way DR operations are executed and monitored for hundreds of different systems using OCI console as a single pane of glass. Now, DR at scale, I talked about this a little bit with that little story about the company, the JDE service provider. So, do you have the IT staff needed to recover more than one or two critical systems at the same time? Probably not. Full stack DR is designed to handle, DR workflows at scale without involving a cadre of technical expert when the time comes to recover many systems at the same time. So I'm sure a lot of you, I've been in those calls. You have those big calls that like 30, 40 people on them, and you're all running around doing a bunch of stuff and handing things off as you accomplish things. So we're trying to avoid that. Simple execution. So full stack DR is an OCI native service that provides a simple and consistent interface to orchestrate DR operations for many different systems, making it easy for any authorized user to trigger a failover or switchover without needing to understand anything about the underlying recovery process. This means your senior, highly skilled IT staff can stay focused on solving problems during the disaster rather than being bogged down explaining how to do things or stepping through hundreds of tedious and time consuming steps needed to recover 10 or 20 different systems. So now validate DR before it's needed. Non-intrusive, non-disruptive pre-checks are built into the service. Pre-check helps validate that everything in DR plan is ready for a DR operation, such as a switchover or failover. Now, pre-checks can be run at any time by any authorized user. Optional pre-checks are automatically included anytime a user executes a DR plan. These are sanity checks. Now, just so you know, we're about to release some new features in the product, and it's going to also include DR drills. So DR drills are a mock switchover that do not impact production, and they allow you to actually go through probably, I'm going to guess, just to guess, about 95% of a real switchover without impacting your production or disrupting it. So it goes a step further. And finally, on this slide, you can validate DR before it's needed. So non-intrusive, non-disruptive pre-checks is, again, the thing that I'm talking about there. So I just want to make that clear. So capitalize on your existing effort. You've already spent a bunch of time devising and perfecting disaster recovery for a couple of critical systems. There's no need to redesign or re-architect what you're already doing. So full stack DR is designed to automate the recovery steps for any Oracle or non-Oracle system based on the way you've already deployed your system for DR across two regions. All right, so you can also keep your current processes. So a lot of people have spent some time, creating some little bits and pieces of automation around the recovery process. So we can automate the recovery steps for whatever processes and deployment architecture are being used right now. So existing scripts and programs can be easily added into full stack DR plans, which we'll see in a little bit. I got some other videos that where I'm not going to show you, but I'm going to show you where to find them that show this. And then you're free to design new DR processes. So if you haven't already, let's say you already have something deployed for DR, and now we're giving you an easier way of doing it and the ability to do it a completely different way. We can automate those recovery steps for whatever new systems you're planning also. So now we're going to give you some new tools that make it easier to do things that were really hard for you to do before. And now we make it easy. So you can design a new process around that. All right, moving on. Okay, use any DR topology. Oh, you know what I wanted to mention about that? I think in this one, didn't you guys? I know. Jason, didn't you have a one of your customers was doing? Before I get to that, I should have mentioned this. Um, don't you have a customer that they had an existing process for one of their systems, and they just used full stack DR to build automation around something they implemented years ago? Wasn't that what you guys did?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a customer, can't be named, that had an application that was custom built in-house, and it was probably built 15, 20 years ago, right? Very old application. fairly standard. It's almost called a three-tier topology, but this was something that was built a long time ago. They had their own application recovery scripts, database recovery scripts, and what they really needed was, as I mentioned earlier, that force multiplier, right? They didn't have enough manpower to be able to, recover multiple of these. So we ran a POC with them on full stack disaster recovery. One of the initial ones when it was still, I think, beta at the time or just in limited release. And what they loved about it was they could take all their existing recovery scripts and just add them to the tool, right? It was basically just defined as, I think it's user-defined task, and they could pull all those in there. And some of them we could actually take and use some of the automation where they didn't have to maintain the script anymore. The database failover procedures was one where it was just kind of configured and clicked through the tool, and you're going to show that later, where they didn't have to maintain those. And so it became a very easy process to skip towards the part of doing testing, because they could bring the scripts, they could use the automation built from the tool, and then we could focus on all our time on how do I run through a few tests to make sure it goes as planned. And the test went phenomenally well. They were very successful. We were able to recover the environments in minutes. And it really kind of showed off that, we could use this to be that force multiplier to recover what was, kind of considered an ancient environment at the time. So they loved it.
Cool. All right, I remember that because it was really cool. It was an old system. Had Oh man, it was really nice. Anyway, let me move quickly through these because we're running out of time. So use any DR topology. All right, so a full stack DR does not limit or make customers conform to a certain way of deploying their business systems for disaster recovery. You use standard OCI services to deploy networking, compute, storage, or databases across OCI regions following any deployment architecture you want to devise. So we don't care. And like Jason said a little earlier, these are all very old mainframe terms, right? Except for Pilot Light. I mean, I started in the late 80s and all these terms were around. We've been using these same terms forever. Anyway, we can do anything. I don't care what it is. We can do anything. Our competitors are doing VM failover, and that's where we just begin, is VM failover. We can do more than that. We can do anything. So built-in modules reduce the effort. Add compute, storage, or database members to protection groups. We're about to add a load balancer to that, file system, and object storage. Then you basically add these members, and then you push a single button, and that calls this built-in these intelligent modules we have that generate custom DR plans pre-populated with the right steps to recover your business system in the right order. So then you can easily add, change, or reshape the DR plans to fit your unique requirements. So we're going to build you a basic plan so you don't have to spend time figuring stuff out. Then you can customize it to do anything you want, anything. So you can call Oracle functions, local scripts, or OCI services when and where you need them during a recovery operation. Fast deployment. You can use Terraform or Ansible or any other tool, resource manager, anything that you want to use to deploy, create these protection groups, which I'm going to explain in a minute, and DR plans and customize them. Use CLIs, SDKs, all of those tools are available for you to fully automate the creation and deployment of full stack DR itself if you want to, just the components. And then really, this is really cool. And I think we beat everybody in the market on this part. We're a serverless architecture. That's hyperbole. Okay. But we are a serverless architecture. Full stack DR does not require any specialized storage to contain images or snapshots. And we don't require any snapshot servers, image servers, conversion servers, admin servers, or management servers of any kind. All right. So what we are full stack DR is a very sophisticated service for managing and orchestrating the recovery process itself. It is not designed to be an installation, configuration, or deployment tool, which means there are no settings to configure either recovery point or recovery time. That's not what our tool is about, because you use normal OCI services to build your solution. We just automate the recovery of it, and we make it easier for you to actually build the workflow or run book or what we call a DR plan. So the recovery point for example, the recovery point for Oracle databases is determined by the frequency of synchronization you set up when you enable DataGuard using normal OCI DBAS processes for setting up DataGuard. And another example is the recovery point for compute instances is determined by the frequency of OCI block or file storage replication you configure when you are using normal OCI block and file system services. Here's some concepts about the product itself. What we do is we have these protection groups. Protection group is a logical container, if you will. You would create one in each of the regions, and then you will see it here in a minute. You associate them together. Now you add members we'll talk about that in a minute too, but you add members, which you see there on the left-hand side of the screen there. Now, after you've added members, then you have plans. And the plans are basically the DR runbook or workflow, the actual steps. And you have two different types of plans. We have a switchover, and then we also have what you see down there, switchover or failover. Oh, and I forgot on the plans. This is where you customize. This is how you customize stuff. You see where it says built in there? Those are things that we already have built in that we already know how to do that you don't need to figure out, right? So when we build a plan, you'll see a bunch of these built-in things in there. And then there's user defined. Those are things that we have no idea what you want to do with your system. We don't have, everybody does something different with their applications. Well, this gives you the ability, user defined, to create, whatever you want. You want to add to this thing, you can. And then the plan executions is what I was talking about for switchover and failover. We have two different types of plans that you create, a switchover or a failover. And of course, a switchover is when everything's fine, hunky-dory, everybody's happy, nothing wrong. We just want to transition a workload from one region to another region. And then a failover is, hey, it's London, it went down. I need everything to be brought up in another region, and I can't get to my primary region at all. That's when you use a failover plan. All right, next slide. Okay, now, like I said before, these are the protection groups. These basically define what is related. Out of the 1,000 virtual machines that you have out there and the 12 databases or 20 databases you have, these two databases and these 10 virtual machines are part of the protection group and this storage, right? So you identify, and then I have these things in each region, or I have only these things in one region, but nothing in the other region. Okay, then you put those members in there, right? Then you associate them together. So now we know that they're peers of each other and they work together, and that defines a business system. Next. Okay, data replication of moving instances. Now, that concept where I was talking about, I can do any DR deployment. I don't care what you call it. All right. It's accomplished one of two ways. All those terms that have been around since the 70s for mainframes, they accomplish those all in either two ways. I'm either have resources that live at one region and I'm moving it to another region, or then the next slide I'll show you is non-moving. Like eBusiness Suite does not tolerate having it in one region and then making it wake up in a different region. Cannot stand that. Won't work. You have to have it deployed in both regions. You can't do anything about it right now. They're working on it, but right now that's the way you have to do it. That's called non-moving. The virtual machines exist in both regions at the same time with different IP addresses and different host names, and the application is installed and you have to maintain it at both sites. We can do that too. So basically, all of those different architectures come down to either moving your stuff or not moving your stuff, okay? Or a combination of the two. You can combine them. You don't have to choose one or the other. You can do them both. I got a customer I'm working with right now that has a huge system that they're doing. And SOA Suite and PeopleSoft and Enterprise Manager and all kind of OIM, OHS, they got all kinds of stuff in there. And some other things they can do with non-movable compute. Most of their things they can do with movable compute, and some they can only have non-movable. It's in the same DR plan. All right, now if you're doing moving instances, you have to use block volume replication because that's all we're doing. We're not really moving them. We're replicating the block storage. You set it up in OCI. You replicate the block volume for your boot and block to the other region, and then we'll manage it during a recovery. But you have to set it up, right? And that's all we're doing is making the storage available or active at the standby region, and then launching a replicated version of the same virtual machines. That's moving. Now we have non-moving. Okay, now non-moving is, see, there's no, look down there at the bottom of the slide. Let me go back to one slide. This slide at the bottom, I had block volume replication. That's for moving instances. If you're doing non-moving instances, there's no reason to replicate their block and boot to the other region. So in this one, you don't do that. Now also notice, this is another big question. Data guard. So people a lot of times want to ask, how do you sync up the storage for your database? You don't. Uses data guard for Oracle. Uses Oracle data guard. It does not use block storage replication. It uses data guard. So you won't use block storage replication for Oracle databases unless you design some sort of solution where you're doing a backup recovery kind of thing. And that's kind of up to you guys to figure out, because we support this right here. We also support your, hey, I just want to do a backup and restore thing, right? We can do that too. But if you want to do it, the way that we recommend, then data guard is there. If you don't want to do it the way we recommend, you're free to do it that way too. We're all about flexibility. Okay, so now here's an example of the kind of things that we do. And this is a failover as opposed to a switchover. So this one, we're assuming that the left-hand side there is the primary region, and it's gone down and it can't access anything at all, right? So in this scenario, we're basic, and this is very high level. There's a lot of other things that happen here, but this is very high level. Basically, we're going to initiate the data guard failover for you. Then we're going to activate the volume groups on the right-hand side there in the standby region. Then we're going to launch those replicated servers. And after we do that, we're going to run any custom scripts that you have to start up your applications and things. And you just add it right into the plan. And all of this just happened by pushing a single button. Right? You don't have to hand it off to the database people to do something, and then they hand it over to the application people, and then they hand it back to the system admins. You don't do all that stuff. You just push one button and it does it all for you. Okay, now remember, we don't set it up or configure that. Now, for non-moving instances, the same example. And remember, you can combine these together into the same plan. Right? You don't have to have one or the other. You can do them both. So in this instance, notice there's less steps here, right? So because I'm only going to initiate the data guard failover, and then I'm going to run the custom scripts. It's not moving, so I haven't replicated the storage. There's no reason for me to do anything with the storage.
Deepak, you mentioned what's the 9 minutes and 30 seconds that you saw on, it would have been slide 19, the duration. So with FSDR, Greg, keep me honest here. With FSDR, it's as you run your recovery plans, it's going to tell you the duration of each task. So for example, on that one, it was a failover, right? And there's going to be a certain amount of tasks, and one of the tasks could be failover from primary to standby. And that task is going to have a timing, right? That might be one of the longer lead items. It takes 6 minutes. What you're also going to get for timings is the overall duration of that plan. So once the full plan has been executed, right, your app's up, your database is up, and there's no more steps to run, it's also going to give you a total time of, start to end, what the time was. And so what you might have saw there on the slide was, I think the overall time it took to run that plan, which had been all the steps are done, the failover is complete, and the end-to-end was 9 minutes and 30 seconds.
Right. That's just for that, right? So whatever that was, right? So we'll see this in the demo that I'm about to show you guys. But we keep track of, how much time it takes to do each and every step, and then the overall time it took the whole thing. And we have a lot of, demo environments for all these solutions we're building for for EBS and PeopleSoft and JDE and OAC and OIC and all these different applications. And so we set it up in our environment, and then we run it. And we're averaging recovery times for a switchover, by the way. Probably around, I'd say, from anywhere from 18 to 25 minutes. Now, I'm going to qualify that because we don't have a real workload. So your production system is going to be different. So I can tell you how much these recovery times are as much as I want to, but they are not production. So I want to caution you guys about that. So that's why I don't say, hey, we can do this in under an hour. I don't know. I don't know what you're doing in your, with your application. I don't know how long it takes you to start your application. I don't know how long or how many transactions and logs and things like that you're creating for your database. How long does it take DataGuard to recover? I don't know. It depends on what your workload is, right? So, but I can tell you with a non-production workload doing absolutely nothing, the switches are taking around 20 minutes on the average. Can we do full stack DR and cross AD setup? Yeah. Now I'm going to caution you. There's one thing that we don't do is autonomous database has a local standby copy. We can't manipulate that right now. We just do in between regions. But other than that, we do cross region or cross AD. So I hope that answers your question there. After a failover, this is Joe. After a failover, is there a pre-built options for reestablishing the DR so that oh yeah, you're going to like this. So everything's automatic. You don't have to reestablish anything. Now, after a failover, you are going to have to do a couple of cleanup things, like DataGuard is going to be in kind of a failed state. You got to resynchronize that. Let's see what else. You might have to clean up a couple artifacts from the volume group and that sort of thing. But once it's very simple. But as far as managing the DR plans themselves, it's all automated for you. We'll see that. I hope that after a failover, there's pre-built options for reestablishing DR. It's reestablished automatically. A full stack DR for an engineered system like Hyperion is currently not possible. That is correct. Yep. So yeah, you might be able to do it. I don't know what Hyperion does or what it is, but I know like C3, cloud customer, that kind of thing. PCA, those things. They have they're not, we're working with them, but they're not like they're a OCI like environment. So we're kind of waiting for them to do something for us. But we are going to be doing cloud at customer, Exadata cloud at customer, and then also DRCC. So anyway, and we have on our roadmap to do a hybrid and multi-cloud, but that's a couple years out. So is this SaaS for customers? No, I wouldn't say like it's. I don't know if I don't know what you mean by SaaS. If you mean, click a single button and then I deploy the entire application stack for you and then set up the DR and stuff like that. We don't do that kind of thing, but we can protect things like OAC is a PaaS service, I think, something like that. Anyway, like OAC, we can do that kind of stuff. And I've got
Deepak, I think you got it right. So think of FSDR as the tool that's going to automate your tasks, right? So if you got a custom list of tasks, this is a tool that's going to run them faster. It is going to basically, play the role of you so that when you've got a failover, this thing kicks off all those tasks. But it also is going to help you create some of those Oracle specific tasks, like doing a failover from primary to standby, right? That's one of our APIs. We can control that. And you don't need a script for that. So FSDR is going to extend that capability. So you just have to click through the console to configure it versus having to write a script to run it. And FSDR will take care of that as well.
Yep, and there's another one, DNS switch. Yeah, it's not an option for on-prem, of course. And even in OCI, if you want to do it through OCI, then we have APIs that you can do. But a lot of customers, your network, justifiably, your network admins don't want to let go of DNS because people screw it up, right? So you may have a DNS process where you have to open up a ticket and that kind of thing. You still have to do that. I can't do anything about that. There's a URL for what I'm looking at right now. We have a Slack channel. This one that you're looking at right here, it's outward facing so it's for you guys. It's in the Oracle developers workspace. It's got a lot of resources like these videos I'm going to start for you here. And I got this deep dive. This is important. So if you go here, go to this deep dive right here, and it's going to go to these YouTube videos. The thing I want to mention about that Slack channel is it has documentation there, slide decks, our YouTube videos, and these tutorials. When I'm talking about here's how you do EBS, click on that thing right there. It'll tell you how to deploy EBS for DR across regions and how to set it up in full stack DR. Same thing for WebLogic. And then pretty soon you're going to see and this is the MAA version of it, and this is the normal version of it. And then you'll see OAC out here, and pretty soon OIC, PeopleSoft, all kinds of stuff. So this is a really good resource for you guys.
What does full stack DR look like in the OCI console? Key benefit
Good.
I'm demonstrating today is that the person executing the DR plan does not need to know or understand anything about the application being recovered or have any specialized skills. You still need highly skilled technical resources on your recovery team, but they can focus on solving problems rather than being bogged down typing commands at a keyboard. I'm going to step you through the entire process of executing a switchover using full stack DR with the click of a single button. Now watch closely because the process only takes about 30 seconds. Let's begin. Navigate to Migration and Disaster Recovery in the OCI console. Select DR Protection Groups. Select the DR Protection Group for the business system, which is cleverly named MyApp01 in this demo. Remember that DR plans must always be executed from the standby protection group. This is the primary protection group, which means I need to change my context to Phoenix since that is the standby peer for this protection group. Now select the protection group. Select Execute DR Plan. Notice the pre-checks are enabled by default. You can uncheck this to save some time if you are confident everything is going to work. I lack that confidence, so I'm going to leave pre-checks enabled. And now select the single button that triggers the execution. That's it. That was the entire process for initiating the recovery for any business system, no matter how complex or how many steps it takes to recover. You can execute DR plans for other business systems once the recovery team is confident things appear to be running smoothly. Personally, I would wait until the pre-checks have completed successfully before executing DR plans for other business systems. Now let me show you a few things about the UI while we wait for the switchover to complete. Don't worry too much about the terms I'm using to describe things. I'll explain terms and technical concepts in the next video. Let's take a quick look at pre-checks. Pre-checks validate the readiness of various things like replicated storage if you've added volume groups as members. It ensures DataGuard is ready for switchover or failover if you've added one or more databases as members. And it checks to see if stopping VMs at the primary site and launching VMs at the standby site are likely to succeed. It also ensures any subnets you specified for VNIX at the standby region haven't been accidentally deleted by somebody. If you are executing a switchover like I am here, then the pre-check ensures readiness at both the primary and standby regions. If you are executing a failover, then pre-checks only ensure readiness at the standby region. Let me show you one more thing. This is called a plan group. Plan groups contain one or more plan steps like this. If this step encounters a problem, full stack DR will allow you to solve the problem, then return here to either skip or retry the step again. You can also view the log for each plan step. Like our competition, you can cancel the entire DR operation if things are going horribly wrong. However, something we offer that our competition doesn't is the ability to temporarily pause the DR operation, fix whatever problem you encountered, and then resume the DR operation where it left off. Full stack DR also keeps track of how long individual steps and groups of steps are taking to complete. The switchover is now complete. The very last thing I'm going to show you is the duration time. For those of you that want to know exactly how long it took to recover a business system, this shows the entire time it took to complete a switchover or failover. The total duration time for a failover is probably a better number to use when trying to track the recovery time because failovers only execute steps at the standby region. That's it. I'm going to take a deep dive into the common terms and technical concepts in the next video.
All right, I'm going to stop there and just point out that there's the next video I keep talking about is this one right here. So this goes through those concepts that I talked about briefly, goes into much more detail about them. That's why it's about 10 minutes long. And then this one tells you exactly everything that you do to set this thing up, including customizing the plan to do whatever you want. It's in this 23-minute video right here. But there's this, what is the license fee for OCI DR? Are you talking about this full stack DR? If you are, it's really super competitive. Like really, really competitive. And it's basically 1.28 cents or 1.89 cents per hour. So I rounded up to 1.3 cents per hour, OCPU hour for database and compute. Don't care what you do with storage. I don't care how you do your DR. I don't care. I only care about how much OCPU you have in each region. I'll give you an example really quick if that's what you were asking about. If you had some business system that had 500 OCPU in it, then it would cost you, of database and compute, it would cost you $56,832 a year. And then if you have a customer, some sort of discount, then you would take that away from that. OAC, for example, I figured that out. That's $75 a month to use full stack DR to protect Oracle Analytics Cloud. Can we have a static IP at the DR site? That's a really good question. Now, on the private interface, so just so you know, on the private interface, you can actually, and I show this. Yes, I do. No, I don't. In the video, we got another video that shows it, but you can actually say, I want this IP address. I'm in region 1. Here's my private IP address that I have here. When I go over to region 2, I want you to use this private IP address on this particular subnet with this VCN.
Sure. Awesome session today. Thank you, Jason and Greg. Really appreciate your time and help with this session. I hope it was a good learning experience for everyone. And yeah, thanks everyone. And we hope to see you next time.